G'day, folks. It is the coach here, and I have an absolute legend of a guest. Someone who I used to play with quite a lot. Had amazing games with this fine specimen of a wargamer, and unfortunately, he left our shores. But he's overseas, educating the masses on how to be an absolute legend. I am the coach, as always, and I'm here with my amazing guest. It is Dan Unsupervised. You may recognize him as the man riding a kangaroo on the Honest Wargamer. Dan, g'day.
G'day, mate. Oh, it's good to hear an Australian accent again. Now, I know that I did hear that you obviously pointed out that I am over here educating the masses. Now, some might like to say that I'm a messiah, and they'd be right. They'd be right. They'd be completely right. That's exactly what I am.
Just don't do what I've been doing recently. I've been taking the mickey out of my wife, telling her how much of an influence I am.
Oh, yeah.
Completely taking mickey, and I'm walking around like with my hands, you probably can't see it, like, walking around like a messiah. And I'm like, look, time's going to get tough when I set up an OnlyFans, but you'll let me do my thing. I'm an influencer. And she's just like, shut up.
You are influencing nothing except the couch you'll be sleeping on tonight.
Literally influencing nothing. But Dan, for anyone who doesn't know Dan, he formerly was Dispossessed Dan. He kind of evolved like a free guild guard, becoming a Stormcast and being reforged. But Dan and I, we go way back. Dan does come from, I'd say you come from Sydney, but you did play in Sydney for a while. Had a cracking game at the Australian Masters, the very first one. Funny to think that it was the Dispossessed versus the Free Guild at the Masters.
Oh, that was back before they were anything as well. Like, ooh,
we had no allegiance abilities.
Hell no, we didn't have shit. I remember I have a horrifying memory of throwing my stuff at your Free Guild for an entire game and just watching them die and being like, okay, how do I get through? Maybe this is the answer. And then just whatever it was dying, I'm like, all right, that didn't work. Salsted Prime, in you go. And then him dying and be like, okay.
He failed to die. I think it was like a game or two before that game, I played Matt Campbell, and Matt Campbell had Blades of Corn, and he was going to run at my guards. He's like, I'm not charging you. I'm like, that is the most uncorn thing you could possibly do. He's not charging these little generic humans, but he's just like, nah, I'm not charging you.
But it was also like that game was awesome because I hadn't come up against Free Guild before, and I was suddenly like, wicked. And then when I faced them at CanCon the next year, at the start of the next year, I was really, really stoked. It was so awesome to play them again and be like, I've got an idea. Like I was like, after getting absolutely rinsed in that and scraping out like a few kills. Like they weren't even victory points. I was like, I'm just going to get a couple of kills. I then went into the next game being like, all right, like I've got a chance in this because of my previous encounter with these gun wielding mustachioed banditos. It was awesome. It was great. I loved it. I honestly, it was an awesome game when I played you. And then when I played them again, it was still an awesome game. Like I dig some of those old school allegiances, but unfortunately not to be anymore. Not to be.
But look, it's great to have you here. You are a man of bearded tastes. We're here to talk all things sportsmanship, and Dan and I have been talking for a long time about this particular topic, and I think it's something that we don't talk about enough. And that is whether you call it sportsmanship, gamemanship, whether it just talks about being just a good human. How do we explore that, I guess, on the tabletop? And for all the tournaments that I've been to with Dan is either rated as the best sport and legitimately given an award and a little trophy to kind of walk away with, or has always been nominated as just an amazing opponent. So the purpose of today really is to discuss what makes a good opponent, what you can do on the tabletop to be a better opponent. And it's all about those like verbal and non-verbal clues that we kind of have. Like there might be some things unconsciously you're doing that makes you a good opponent, or some things that you might be doing that really upset your opponent, and maybe by dialing it back or changing your behavior, you could get a really good outcome and a really good game. Whatever game. And like, Deke's in the chat already, he's sort of talking about playing you at Moab and just saying how despite you smashed him, he just thought you were an absolute gentleman and he loved playing you. So
it was rough. I actually remember that because his Blood Knights are beautiful and real. Let's put that out there. Not edited up Dragon Princes, which was still the in fashion at the time. But the thing that was rough is that his entire army had that +1 armor save if you didn't have rend, and my entire army was, yo, we packing so much rend. So it was just, oh man, it was a rough matchup for them. And I won't lie, I was stoked to get it because I was like, I'm gonna shoot all those sexy little vampire boys into bits, and it was great.
And he says that even though, like, if he would have beaten you in that game, he would have been best death at that. And I know that was a big goal.
That's right. Oh!
That's right. It was like the heartbreak that you stopped him from walking away with best death, and Liam walked away with best death. His heart broke, but it kind of.
That's right. I forgot that. Oh.
But it segues nicely to the fact that even though that Deke didn't get the victory over you and he didn't win best death because of you, he still remembered you 3 or 4 years later, thinking about you as an opponent, being a great opponent, a really great game, win, lose or draw. And I think all of us probably aspire that our opponents are going to think about us in a very good light. They're not going to walk away thinking, oh, that Dan guy, he's a jerk, he's a cheat, I don't want to play that guy again. You want to really walk away having a really good game with your opponent. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, like I honestly, I've come to feel like it's not necessarily always that you just want to walk away being best mates. I don't necessarily need to be best friends with everyone I play, but walking away being like that, I'm so glad I played that game of Warhammer. That's the thing that I would love. If I could do one thing every game I play, I would hope that I could do that. It's not possible every time, but it's like at work, I tell the people I work with that they fall into one of two categories, that they're either people who make my day and my job easier and more fun, or they make it harder and more frustrating. There's no in between. There's no gray. So if there was no gray, I'd much rather people walk away being like, that was a game I was really happy to play, as opposed to like, that was a game that I would rather forget.
So let's maybe set the scene here, and for some people they may not have even thought about this concept, because I know in Australia, where we come from, our tournaments and our events have this little thing called sportsmanship, where it might have points associated to it. It might just be a guide that it might be a checklist, or there's this thing called sportsmanship. So from your point of view, what is gamesmanship, sportsmanship? What does it mean when it comes to tabletop miniatures and Age of Sigmar, or maybe just tabletop in general?
Well, okay, so I would actually say for me, the concept of like being a good sport and being everything like that is almost separate from it. And I've heard people who have, and I've spoken to when I was over in the UK, and even when I was down at LVO, talking to people who had differing opinions. And that's because they don't understand that for us, when we say sportsmanship and gamesmanship is applied to your overall score in an Australian tournament, it's not a subjective thing. It's an objective thing. It'll be like 5 questions, and it'll be like, did your opponent roll all of their dice clearly and tell you what they needed to roll before rolling? Did your opponent clearly explain what abilities they were using? Did they arrive at the table on time? Yeah. That kind of a thing. And it's not, because that way, if you say they didn't, the TO can literally go up to you and be like, tell me why you didn't give them this. And they say X, Y, and Z happened. And the TO goes, great. And if their next opponent does the same thing, then maybe they can go and impact that player. Now, I know that, and credit to them, there have been a couple of players that I've played against who had a TO go up to them and say, hey, mate, just letting you know, people have been kind of dinging you for this, and I just want to know. And the players were like, oh, right, yeah. They had absolutely no idea what was going on. And then when it popped out, they were like, oh, shit. And they kind of adjusted their behavior. In the same way that when I played Dispossessed, they have like 8 different rules that are called grudge. And then it wasn't until someone I played mentioned it to the TO, who then came and spoke to me, and I was like, holy shit, yeah. Because I play them all the time, I sit there and go, oh, so he's going to do that because of the grudge. And I explain all the grudges at the start of the game. But then by the time you get to the end of the game, I've just been saying grudge so much because I love the word. But whoever I'm actually playing against, they don't have any idea what those rules are. Oh, Zach Maples, what a bloody legend.
Yeah, thanks for the donation. That's awesome. Look at you! It's such a Twitch. I love it. I need some little flashing lights, but
Yeah.
I do appreciate that. Thank you very much, Zach. Yeah, no, look, you're 100% correct, and it's interesting because so I guess being Mr. Worldwide, or being a content that obviously isn't just specific about Australia. Some events do have these sports rankings, and you do have things that like a checklist. But then you've also got, even if it wasn't there, right? It's about the behavior, it's the expectations, it's about what we bring to the table to ensure that our opponents have a good game. Now, it's not my complete responsibility to ensure you have a good game, because I think we both need to come to the table with the focus of supporting each other and having a good game. Does it mean that when I'm at a tournament, I'm going to bend my rules and bend over backwards to ensure my opponent's having a bad game and throw the game? It doesn't. But I think what it really means is that when we get to the table, there are these spoken and unspoken rules that are going to ensure that we have a good time, regardless of how the dice roll. Regardless on what happens on the table, we should both walk away feeling like, yep, that was a good game, and I would be happy to play you again.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say that a big part of that doesn't get said a lot is how like you want to be magnanimous in victory and gracious in defeat, right? That's there. I think it was when I was in like playing under-8 soccer that they said that, and I was like, yeah, that's a really good idea, but I had no idea what they were talking about. And I thought it was a really good concept, and I think it applies well. But something that I think we often do that goes the other way is people try to go too far in the reverse. Like when someone wins, something that I realized that I started doing a while back was I almost apologized for beating them. And then I realized I was doing it, and I was like, that's fucking stupid. So if my opponent beats me, I kind of want to give them room to celebrate. They beat me. It's a tournament. They should. It's a competition. We rocked up to compete. If we're playing narratively, different story, but especially in tournament play, give your opponent room to win. And I would say that over here, I have played no one who does that better than V. So her name's Cool Bunny in the Twitch chat and stuff. My goodness, she's a great game. She'll like, when she's killing your models, she's just like, yeah, gotcha. Like she plays Witch Elves and Slanesh, so she's obviously a terrible person. But then when you're playing her, yes, she's shit talking you, and yes, she's doing it, but it's such a wonderful game. And we've had this back and forth where we've almost played each other every tournament. And I think I had 2 up on her, and then she beat me. And every time I won, she'd give me room to celebrate, if that makes sense. Like she would, by her actions, she would allow me to feel good about winning. And I was just like, that's such a really tough skill, because you don't want to make your opponent, they've just played you for 3 hours. They may have won a very hard fought victory. And if you don't give them room to celebrate, you're kind of cheapening that. And so, yeah, it's in the same way that, and when people talk about sportsmanship, you see every sport, you don't just get to be a douchebag. Like at tennis, if someone's an absolute ringhole, then they will like pull them up, and they'll be like warned a couple of times and then fined and kicked out. There is no sport anywhere in the world where you get to be a douchebag and get away with it. So people who say that it doesn't have a place in war dollies, I'm like, I'm really sorry. Unless we're talking like even gladiatorial bloodbaths. So like in Roman days had like a code of conduct and honor. We can do the same. We can for sure do the same.
And I've seen plenty of games where people don't want to play someone again because they've had a bad experience on the table. They're like, I'm dreading the day that I play opponent again. Or if I've seen it get to a point where they've said, if I get drawn up against a certain opponent, I'm going to forfeit. Yeah. I do not want to play this opponent again. So I know we're kind of getting to the weeds a little bit, but this is what we're kind of talking about, guys, when we're talking about sportsmanship. We're talking about, just general gamesmanship. It is just essentially the code of conduct, the ethics, the behavior, everything that wraps around, I guess, when you and I meet at the table. How do we have a good game, whether the dice fall in my favor, against me, if something goes bad, we should walk away feeling that it's a good game. And, if the dice roll differently, it could have been a different outcome, but I would be happy to play you again with the same list or a different list in a different situation. This would be another game I'd highly enjoy.
And the same thing is, it's like I've played people a second time with the same list that kicked the ever living snot out of me, and been happy to go back into that game and be like, all right, round 2, let's see if I can do slightly better. Like and that's like it's an attitude thing from the person playing it. And some people go to tournaments to win. That's their fun in the hobby, and I'm not going to take that away from you. You can have that as your fun. But the one that then annoys me is when you see people apologizing for it. I'm like, no, just embrace it. Just be like, I'm here to win, and I'm going to go hard, and I'm going to try. And the only downside I sometimes see to that attitude is those people can be the poorest losers, because the unfortunate truth is that if you set out to win, there is only one place in that tournament that is a positive outcome for you, which is if you're first. So if you have any little stumbles along the way, you don't have a positive outcome. Whereas if people who say maybe focus a little bit more on the games and they want to do well, there's more options for them to succeed. There's more avenues for success in their tournament experience.
Oh, that was very good, Tony Robbins. Thank you for that motivational
that's so
speech.
great. And now I'm going to teach you all to what was the movie with Jack Black, Shallow Hal? I'm going to teach you all to see things by their true personality. Yeah.
But you've raised a wonderful point, is that the expectation setting at the tabletop, or even the expectation going into an event. When I go to an event, a person who has usually a good outcome at the tournament is often the person that doesn't say, I'm going to go win the event. They're the person that's going to say, I would like to win more games that I lose, or I would like to win 4 out or 5 or 3 or whatever that number may be, but I want to have 5 great games.
Yeah.
That is my outcome. My outcome is I want to meet 5 new opponents. I want to have 5 good games. I'd like to win, but not necessarily be that my sole outcome is to crush my enemies, get a 10,000 kill points, go 5-0, and prove the world that I am professional in Warhammer, and I'm going to quit my job and go pro with all of the millions of internet dollars available for winning LVO, CanCon, and just let it rain.
Yeah, that's it. And if that happens, I'm not saying you don't celebrate. Like, don't rock up there and take the Galmaraz Hammer Trophy and act all small. Like, rock up there, pick it up, and point at everyone and just scream, "Bow, peasants!" Like, you can celebrate and enjoy your victory. It's about how you do it that matters, I think. And that's where I think it's a little bit can be tough at times to remember that the person playing you is a human being. And I've been guilty. We've all been guilty of it. Everybody who plays War Dollies, we sometimes get a little bit taken, like overcome with the competitive aspect. And that's okay. It's a competitive game. You see it in sports all the time, but it's how you handle it. Like,
there's plenty of times where you've got to take the pressure off, much like driving a car, you've got to put your foot down or kind of pull back a little bit sometimes. But let's go to the root. Let's go right. We've kind of defined what sportsmanship or gamesmanship is. What are some of the characteristics that you see, or what makes you? And I'm not trying to put you on a pedestal here. I'm not saying that Dan Unsupervised is the greatest sportsman that ever lived, because he probably would agree with that statement. But
really would.
It would, clear athlete,
so attractive as well. That's a
and
really
humble.
tough one.
Very humble. Humble's definitely a characteristic of a good sport. But what makes somebody a good sport?
Honestly, a good sport, I think, is somebody who is interested in both players having walking out of the game with joy in some regard. Whether it's a tiny moment, like it can be a tiny little storyline moment that you create, whether it's an awesome person that you play against. I have had intensely hard fought battles with someone where it's clearly that we've gotten to turn 3 and we're both in it to win it. Like, we've both got a shot. It's like game 4 of the tournament, and it's managing expectations is what I would say of the person that you're with. I've been like, look, hey, before we roll for priority, this is on a knife edge. So clearly we're both heading towards the top. Let's play hard, no hard feelings. And once we finish the game, we'll kiss and make up and everything. But you have carte blanche for the next 2 turns to play as gamey and as hard as you want. And I'd love the same in return. Are we cool? In the same way that before a game, I would always tell people that I will like play to intent. You know, like if you say, so my movement is this, you're this far away, so I'll need a 7 to charge. Do you agree? I'd be like, yeah, of course I agree. And then if it conspires that when we measure it, they need an 8, I'd be like, when we measured it before, you needed a 7, all good. So for me, it's honestly about managing your expectations. And that isn't a bad thing. That's not saying lower them. That's just saying that when you rock up to the table, when you're talking to the person you're playing against, be fair with them in the same way that you would to yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And when I think about gamesmanship as well, I do think that what sets the tone, and I remember that every opponent that I meet, in most cases, it's the first time I'm meeting that opponent. You know, yes, I absolutely have the luxury of, you know, getting to play my friends again and getting to, you know, play people I've played at in the past. But often enough, when I go to a tournament or an event, I'm playing someone for the first time, and they have a different expectation that I have. They have a different reality that I have. They've come to this tournament for a different reason that I have. So that first 5 to 7 minutes for me has been absolutely critical to understand my opponent, because if I can't relate to that person, this is going to be a really long 3-hour game. Mm-hmm. You know, 2 hours 45 minutes plus 15 to 30 minutes of deployment, whatever that tournament rules might set. But you know, it's essentially a 3-hour game. That's a long 3 hours. Oh, and that's.
Well, I think that effectively it's the same thing as if you knew you were going to be sitting beside someone on a plane for 3 hours and you had to interact with them. You can't just put your noise cancelling headphones on and watch The Office for 3 hours. Like, you could squeeze 9 episodes. That was terrible maths, but it is my Friday. All of you be patient.
That was a good assumption. Yeah, I like it.
Like you could squeeze 9 in there and ignore them completely. Can't do that. You have to interact with them. You may as well make it okay. Like you like, and ultimately we have this wonderful shared language of war dollies. Whether you're narrative, competitive, like whether you are all about painting and construction, whether you just love the lore and you play based on the lore, we've got a shared language. Look at the person and just be like, where can I connect with you? Because if you finish a game, no matter how competitive. I remember playing Dave Kerr when he was coming off, I think this was just when he was coming off back-to-back Masters wins with Nurgle when they were the new hotness in round 4 of CanCon. And goddamn, that was a competitive game. And it was tight. I had him on the ropes and I lost the game. The Prime let me down. The goddamn Prime failed to charge and then couldn't hit a barn door with a machine gun if he was firing from
that Prime always fails you, by the way.
I shamed him so hard. And then they changed his rules so he always gets it. But yeah, like that game was really competitive, really tight, and Dave was an absolute gentleman the whole game. Even when he was doing things and he'd be like, this is going to suck for you. And I was like, yep. Sure is. Like it was in a place of like mutual respect. It wasn't like I'm going to make you cry because I want to taste your tears. And he probably would have if I did. But I think that was a really cool moment to play that game against him and be like, he's the master. He's got everything to play for and everything to lose. No one would blame him right now for being really competitive and really gamey. And he didn't. He was spectacularly fantastic to play against. It was one of the most competitive games I've ever played, and I would play it again in a heartbeat.
So, and maybe before I go to this question, I want to drill down a little bit. And you mentioned just before the Dave Kerr moment, and Dave's great, by the way. I've had the pleasure of playing Dave, and he is absolutely clinical. I remember him playing the game, and I remember he looking at my army. He's like, "I'm going to outdrop you. This is what I'm going to do. You can't do much about it. Sorry, not sorry." Yeah. And like, he wasn't a jerk about it, but you know, like he knew what he was going to do, and he executed it perfectly. And I'm like, yep, good game. You did what you said you were going to do, and you know, we still had fun and we still played it out. for anyone wondering what he did, he had the changeling, popped it up behind the line, shot down my general. At the time, was the only person who could use command abilities, which essentially just like neutered my whole army because the changeling deployed at the back of your line. He was invisible. He turned one, he used his destiny dice to just like absolutely
Nuke you.
pop everything. Got summoned on the Balewind. It was like.
Yeah. Yep. Damn. Damn. Yep.
But you mentioned rapport. You didn't mention specifically rapport, but you mentioned a common language, and that's something that we often forget, right? You know, we all have different sports or movies or television or music or whatever interests us. But when we're at an event, a tournament, an event, we're playing with each other, we have this common language of Warhammer. We all like Warhammer. We all like Age of Sigmar. We all like Games Workshop. We have something in common at minimum. And whether it's complimenting your opponent's army, whether it's just asking them how they got started, whether it is asking them how their event's going so far and what's their track record or who they've played against, we have this common language that we can start building a relationship. And you know what? I may not add them as a Facebook friend or a Twitter, follow them on Twitter after the game, but we've got something that's going to keep us entertained for the next 3 hours when we're rolling dice, but also when we're not rolling dice.
I think a phrase that I heard when I was really young is that interesting people are interested. And I remember like hearing that and being like, oh yeah. And I dig hearing other people's stories. And when we're playing the game, like it's a fun game. If you wanted to be isolated in a room playing a game and kicking 12 different shades of hatred out of somebody, you would be playing video games. You wouldn't choose Warhammer. Warhammer is so much more expensive. It's so much more time consuming. It's so much more investing. And it takes 3 hours to play a game. That's excluding the time that you took to set up and travel to and set up the game and then pack up the game afterwards and go home. Like you could get, if winning was your satisfaction, you could get that much, much better, much more cheaply, and much more regularly, and probably make more money doing it. Like there is literally Warhammer is the worst for all of those things. So if you've still chosen to do it, there's a reason. There's got to be a reason that you love it. And I think that every time you come into play someone, that's very hard not to realize.
Yeah, if you wanted that clinical experience, you would go to, say, Magic the Gathering. And I'm not ratting up Magic the Gathering, guys, I'm not ratting it out, but you do see tournament players who put their headphones on. They don't really have to interact with their opponent because they're just responding to the cards. You don't have to rely on a dice roll. You don't have to hear a rule because, everything's clearly articulated and you can do the game in a very transactional way. While we really have a relationship building over time. So let me ask you, like, what's some of the examples that you've seen or things that you've done in the past that have helped you to be a good sport in the game?
Honestly, like a big one for me is, and we're not always great at it, but I hate the gotcha moments. I don't think they're great. I've had a couple of times where, like you explain your army over and over and over and maybe you miss a point. But I go through, as I go through my list with my opponent, I'll tell them, this does this, and I'll try to be really clear. Because if I beat someone and if I win, I would like it to be because I outplayed them, not because they weren't aware of this supreme tactical combination that I had. And sometimes that slips through the cracks, for sure. But it happens with everything. Sometimes you mispredict it or you don't do things right, or you're like, Jesus Christ, Ironjaws still moves so fast, turn one. And it's a horrifying experience when you're like, and you're sitting there going, yep, you told me. Yes, you didn't tell me. And I took that information. I didn't really pay attention to it. That's on me. Like, you can have those, but I think a big part is, like, for the first part is being really clear with your opponent what your army can do. And then, like, from on top of that, you don't have to tell them your battle plan. But at the start of the game, sitting down and just getting to know them as a person. I don't care if it's the last game in a tournament and you're playing out on a stream or something like that. Shake their hand, ask them how they're doing. Do they want a beer? Probably not. We're getting competitive. That's fine. Coffee, green tea, a little bit of Chopin while you relax and listen to Symphony Number 9. I don't know. But we can find those little moments together. And I think that it's cool also for me asking how their army has gone previously. Like I always ask, what's a cool story from your army? That's a big one for me, because I'm like, we've all got that story. Like for me with my Gutbusters, it's the time that my Noblars took 2 wounds off Nagash when he was 3-up re-rolling ones and then all of his death saves. And he killed 40 Noblars, but 40 Noblars took 2 wounds off Nagash. And it's my favorite story about that army. And I like, everybody's got them. Like, I'm sure that, okay, your free guild, right? Back pre-allegiance abilities, your free guild would at least have one story about, like, defying the odds, right?
So I'll tell you one of my favorite stories from my gits. There's a particular battle. So this particular battle where my gits are against Sylvaneth. And my gits released of some fanatics. And the fanatics went into Alariel. The fanatics generated 27 attacks because they do d6 attacks each. So out of 5, I generated 27 of 30. Proceeded to kill Alariel. I got the double turn. Got the double turn. They then charged into Durthu. Did 28 attacks.
No!
This one unit of fanatics just went absolutely ham. It's just like, just swinging at the ball. But like, absolutely out of left field. But you're right. Like we all have stories. We all, and it's one of the reasons why when I meet my opponent and I'm chatting them and, hey, what you got? What's your name? Where are you from? Especially for something where Australia, where our land is so diverse and people come from all a part of the country. Where are you from? What's your gaming club? Who are you here with? When I hand that list over to them, because in Australia we do hand our list to our opponents. I always have named characters. I always write the name of each of my characters on my sheet. One, it's a conversation starter. If you're a narrative player, you might ask about the narrative. But if nothing more, I've given you something to start with, and it's my little story about my kits, my free guild, my death army, whatever it might be.
So my Dwarden Warden King has been my Dwarden Warden King since Warhammer Fantasy. Now, when he first started out, he was Barundun Stone Fist, and I painted his fist like a stone. And then I upgraded him to Barundun Iron Fist and Bronze Fist, and he's gone up the fist colors. He's now Barundun Gold Fist in the Age of Sigmar. And so he's I don't know where to go next, like Diamond Fist or Platinum Fist. Like there's really, I'm running out of limited options. Maybe Ether Fist, and I'll just give him some kind of weird etheric hand. But like his whole shtick for me has been that like slow build of him. And I love telling stories about the time that he personally drove off a Doom Bull in Warhammer Fantasy, or like all the different things. And we all have those stories. And I think one of my favorite questions to ask someone, and it is like, tell me what the worst unit in your army has done that was spectacular. Like take your grots, take your whatever. What did they do that was unbelievable? Because that's the story where someone's like, oh yeah, my archers once sniped out a changeling, or like I had someone who had a unit of pistoliers back when pistoliers were not great, that in one round of shooting, shot a Gaunt Summoner off of a Balewind and single-handedly turned the tide of the game. And I was like, that's so cool. And so those pistoliers were like clearly this player's pride and joy, because they'd done that one thing. They'd never achieved anything since. But because of that,
and then you purposely go and kill them and you make them cry.
Oh, I destroyed them. I was like, they've done it once, they'll do it again. They will not see a second turn.
Just like one of my War Machine crew who was shooting at a Gargant that was charging them once. And I think the Gargant was like 3/4 wound, and it still got into combat. And they end up killing the Gargant with its War Machine tools. It's like its telescope or like its compass. It's just like stabbed it in its infected toe, and the Gargant's then just fallen over.
War Machine crew kills are possibly the biggest embarrassments of Age of Sigmar, which is why they must be celebrated. You are terrible if you are a War Machine crew. You have dedicated yourself to a life of poking things with pliers, and if you kill anything, you deserve of a parade. They
hit on 5s, wound on 5s. Yep. jump in that war wagon and send it up, parades and banners. But but you've raised so many good points. I want to just pause for a second to make sure everyone kind of hears that. So first things first is you're asking a whole bunch of questions to your opponent. Now it's not like you're Inspector Dan and you're going to ask a million questions for asking a million questions. You're asking questions to build rapport, to find something in common, to build relationship. Whether it's it might be something simple like their name, and write it down. Like when you ask for someone's name, write it down, because the last thing, or the thing that's going to get you to lose sportsmanship very quickly, is if at the end of the game when you're filling out your little sheet, you're like, "Oh, what's your name?" And it's like, we've just been playing for 3 hours, and you either don't remember my name or you never asked me for my name. Cool.
See, and that's actually something I tell a lot of people, because I'm so bad at names. I'm terrible at it, and I try so hard, and I'm still not good. So when I meet people, I'm like, I am so sorry. I'm shithouse at this. It's a weakness. I've been working on it for years. For some reason, maybe like I just copped a stocking around the head as a child, and for whatever reason, I can't do it. I don't know where stocking around the head came from, but I will remember this entire game. I will remember your characters' names. I will remember the charges and the fails and everything. But I will struggle with the name. So please be patient. And that for me is a part of setting up expectations. Like if you're, it's not that I'm not paying attention, it's that I'm bad at it. And so I'm like, I would like you to know that this is a huge weakness of mine, and I am so sorry. It's not that I don't love you. It's that I shocking admission, am still not confident on whether Christmas Day is the 25th or the 26th. Like, I am 31 years old. Couldn't tell you if you asked me. I'm going to guess 25 because I'm born on the 26th. So I think that's why I get it confused. Just odd information gaps going on there.
It's a 25th.
Great, nailed it.
That's another really good point. So whether I call it my kryptonite, whether I call it, there's this moment in time, and whether I win, whether I lose, and it's probably more dominant when I lose. When the game ends, I kind of go inwards into myself, and it's not that I had a bad game. I reflect a lot, and I think about, how do I do better? How do I change the course? And if I had the opportunity to go back again, what would I do differently? Was there a dice roll? Was there a priority? Was the army that I selected appropriate? But in the minds of my opponents, they might look at me going, "Oh, Anthony had a bad time. He doesn't look happy," and it has nothing to do with the opponent, but rather it's my strategic process, analyzation, introversion type moments where I'm going inside my head going, right, and I'm not even thinking about my opponent. I'm thinking about like replaying the game, but it's like being upfront with my opponent and just being very, very clear and being honest with them, I think is a wonderful thing you can do.
Yeah, because I mean, if I'm playing you and we get to the end and I win and you're taking that retrospective moment, if I know that for you, you're like, hey, look, just so you know I do this. I finish it when I lose. I'm going all a beautiful mind on this. Do you mind if we talk about what I could have done differently? And I'd be like, yes, for sure. I love knowing that the reason that you're acting this way is because you're like you're processing the game that we just played. I'm like, I'd love to be a part of that conversation. Whereas if you just go quiet and silent and stare at the table with a furrowed brow, I'm thinking to myself like, oh shit, have I upset him?
The person's salty, they're angry. Yeah. Like you're right. And being open to feedback as well. And I see great opponents, they'll ask, if the game didn't go their way, it's like, would you have done something differently? Is there something that you saw that I should have done that I should consider? And I can take that feedback on and put that into practice literally the next tournament game. And they might go, oh, you know what? Look, I think, this person wasn't close enough to blah, and you could have done X, or when that particular combat would have happened, I would have done this as opposed to this. I'm like, cool, okay. And being open to feedback. But I think, going back to what you were saying earlier, you were saying have the conversation up front. It could just be asking them about their army, asking them about them as a human, finding out where they're from, or maybe what games club they're a part of, or what's happened on the tabletop so far. Do they have a favorite model? And it might be very obvious just around the painting or the basing, or you might be able to tell straight off the bat what their favorite model is, or maybe they've got a name on their general.
So I'd say there's two things that I think if you struggle with it, there are two things I would suggest, because they're two things that I started doing that have actually made me really happy, and other people have commented, and I mean, shit, like you play Warhammer to be happy. You don't play Warhammer to make other people happy. It's about making yourself happy, and then you are a human being of the planet who also would like other people to be like enjoying spending time around you. So what I would say, the two things I would suggest, a big one is when you find yourself getting into that salty place, ask a stupid fucking question. Really dumb. Like, and I will lead people into it, and I'll be like, hey, so I've got a question. You're great. You clinically took me apart like a surgeon with a scalpel, and you did all of this, and blah blah blah, and XYZ, and the thing I really need to know is, do you scrunch or fold? And I actually find that's cathartic for me. Like, going through that process is, I'll put all that into, and as I say that into words, and then I realize it's actually as important as whether you scrunch or fold. Like, it's a beautiful competitive hobby, but it's not like there's $10,000 on the line yet. Maybe, hopefully, we'll see it in our lifetime. But it's the old saying in hospitality is, it's burgers and fries, not saving lives. And the same thing applies to War Dollies. I am not saying that it is not competitive and not wonderful and spectacular, but let's have just a moment of self-reflection. So that'd be my first one. Ask a stupid question, because it'll start a conversation. But
everyone who wants to know, I'm a folder.
Okay, I scrunch the shit out of it, but I'm an efficient scruncher. I'm not wasteful. Very concerned about the planet. Use bamboo toilet paper, which is expensive, so that's why I have to be an efficient scruncher. Couldn't afford it otherwise. But the other one that I would say is that a lot of people forget in kind of the heat of the moment is to actually be genuinely, and I mean, when I say genuinely, like, it's true. Like, you can be genuinely interested in how your opponent's game went. Like, they played you, and you just spent 3 hours or what in a tournament probably playing opposite them. Ask them how their game went, because they might turn around and be like, exactly the plan. I read you like a book, and you're like, yes, you did. And that's a fun conversation. Or it might be like, I remember the Veronica, who I mentioned before, Cool Bunny, that I played. The first game I played against her, she didn't commit. She had Marathi. Turn one turned her into Big Marathi, and didn't commit her. She spent 3 turns on a flank without charging, and it crippled my entire flank. I didn't know what to do. I was like, she's combat Marathi, but she's not tearing me a new poop hole. Why is this happening? And I was paralyzed by indecision by it. And then when we spoke about it later, I was like, I don't know if you know, but that was a spectacular move. Was that your game plan? And she was like, no, I was thinking this and this and this. And I was like, it was like in a beautiful mind moment. Like, you ruined like 45% of the board for me just by doing that. And I think that we forget that sometimes that's such a fun conversation to have. Maybe it was a beautiful mistake. Maybe it was a ridiculous, like well-planned, orchestrated thing. But it can be awesome to ask those questions. How did that game play for you? Is a great one.
Is that something you always do with Marathi? Is this something that, and and it's something that in my professional world, it's a concept that I talk about called being on the dance floor and being on the balcony. And when you're on the dance floor, I don't know
what it is, but I want to hear. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you put yourself at a nightclub or put yourself anywhere, right? When you're on the dance floor, you can't see what the dance that other people are dancing. You're just in the moment. You're dancing on the dance floor. But when you're on the balcony, you've got this overview of the strategy. You can see, the different little pockets. You can see if people are succinct or if they're doing something completely different. And it's almost like the forest from the trees. But, when you're playing the game and we're in the moment, sometimes we do things without knowing. It's this unconscious kind of kick in. And when you have these moments of self-reflection, this is where you can turn the unconscious into the conscious. So if having Morathi on the flank works for you, perfect. I'm going to try to do that more often. And that's a wonderful way to explore the game. And, you know, some of my greatest friends, we do have these wonderful discussions. And one of the reasons that Liam is on Down Under Sigma is because Liam and I talk non-stop about games, and we have self-reflection moments, and we're completely honest with each other. And sometimes when things don't go well, you know, there's stories of salty Liam. But at the same time, like he's so passionate about his army, and he loves his army so much that he loves to have these retrospectives. So being in the moment and taking these moments after the game is critical. Just to pull you back for a second, I love what you mentioned earlier about offering a drink. So little things like, if you know, and I drink a lot of water, so I go to the bathroom a couple of times during a game. So
definitely only drink water.
Like I'll have like a liter to 2 liter bottle with me, and I'll drink it at the tabletop.
Liter to 2 liter bottle with me at the tabletop. Completely agree. Yes, definitely. Oh yeah, no good. Better hydrate.
But I'll stay hydrated. But I'll go to the bathroom once or twice at a tournament. But I'll always take the opportunity to ask my opponent, "Do you want a drink?" Yeah. And you know, and sometimes they'll take the offer, sometimes they won't. I'd be very conscious of how often I take breaks during the game. And if I'm going to go to the bathroom, it'll literally be 5 minutes, as quick as possible. I will literally run. I'll literally run to the door.
Oh yeah.
Because that breaks the immersion. You don't want your opponent sitting there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, waiting for you, like going, "What's going on?" This is their game time as much as yours. So
also, at some point, I'd start to question their health. You know, like I don't want him sitting there being like, does he only eat carbs? Like, what's his fiber intake like? I don't want them asking that. But I'm the same. Like, I remember at LVO, so when I drink, my bladder is very generous, just the same. And so I'll be like, I'll hold it till the last possible moment because I don't want to leave. And then I'll be like, "I am so sorry. It's touch and go." And I'll jog, and then I'll like run back all like sweaty and shit because we're in a hot convention hall. But yeah, it's the same, right? Like, you don't want to leave someone hanging.
Be respectful of their time, whether it is making sure that your army is set up, ready to go. You know, I advocate things like those TV trays, the things that you can kind of walk around, and you might give it to your mum for Mother's Day, and you know, she eat breakfast in bed. Or some people steal McDonald's trays. I don't advocate that, but you know, have some type of tray that basically allows you to transport your army across a convention quickly, is able to deploy quickly, and making sure that you're there on time. And that means not just for deployment, it also means you're present in the game for as long as possible, and you find ways to speed that up. And if you are going to take a break, like there's been plenty of times where I've said to my opponent, "I'm going to go to the toilet," or "You finish your deploying. I trust you." I'll say this to my opponent. I often don't know them, right? I'm like, "I trust you. I'm going to go to the toilet for 5 minutes. Do your thing." And usually it might be at the movement phase, right? Because that's the least interactive. Like he doesn't need me to move.
Especially if they're a horde army without movement trays. I've literally been like, "Look, I trust you to do your thing. I'm going to sit here, and I'm just going to have a glass of water and take some photos. You do whatever you do. You don't need to explain it."
If you're going to cheat in round 2 of CanCon, that there's literally like a start collecting box up as first prize for beating 240 odd opponents, awesome. Good on you. The victory is not worth that to me. So having trust in your opponent. Now, you know, when we're talking dice rolls, you want to make sure that, and we talked about it earlier, you know, were your dice rolls clear? And that could be simply, I'm going for 3s. So you're declaring straight off the bat what number you're going for, and then you roll the dice so it's clear that opponent can see it. Yeah. And then you remove the misses. Now that's one thing that, you know, that I know I've had to talk to a lot of opponents is, don't remove your hits, remove your misses. So it's clear to see what actually hit. Because the moment you start taking dice, I can't validate if you got the 3 or a 2 because you've picked it up.
And I have played some people who have big horde armies who have said, "To speed this up, do you mind helping me?" And I was like, "For sure." And they were like, "I'll pull out the misses, you pull out the hits." And I was like, what? And I remember, I can't remember who it was that first did it. So I'm doing them a disservice by not remembering. It's happened a few times since. But I was like, what a wonderfully like sportsman-like thing to be like, I'll take the ones that miss, you take the ones that hit. Like, you are literally responsible for my success. And I was like, that's such a cunning way to do it. So, but it also meant that when they were rolling like 60 dice in a hand, rather than rolling 3 times and taking more time, it was roll once, pick, 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 pick. Then to wound, they'd roll, and they were like, this is what I need to wound, rolled the dice, and went, and I picked out all the hits, they picked out all the misses. We saw that, like, at the end, it was like, oh, these 2 we missed, cool, great. And I was like, that is such a cunning way to do it. And I was like, that is very clever, it's very honest, and it made me really respect the person I was playing.
And there are other ways you can do it as well. Like I've done this where, let's say I've used a command point to do a reroll. You know, I might ask my opponent, I'm gonna pull out my misses. Could you pull out my ones? So and then I can re-roll that. Yeah. Or if I do like mortal wounds on a 6, can you pull out my 6s because that's when the sequence ends, and I'll clean up the hits and the misses here. Yeah. There are little things that could speed up the game, but also again keeps the game interactive, and invite your opponent into the game.
Yeah. And I think that that's one, that's part of the reason we play it. And I even though some people might not want to admit it or they don't realize it, for the vast majority of us, the reason that we choose to play War Dollies, as before mentioned, versus other options to give you the same level of satisfaction is because of the human interaction. Now, if the only reason you're playing a game for the human interaction is to break human beings, you should be on a governmental watch list of some kind. And that for me is like, I would much rather be laughing with someone than crying with them. So we may as well enjoy ourselves, and we may as well try to find ways to make them enjoy the experience of playing against us.
A question that I wanted to pull out of the chat, Taylor has asked a really good question, and that talked about taboos. Is there any taboo behaviors kind of that you've noticed, whether it's, you know, unspoken things that you want to avoid or things that you may not be aware that you're doing, but like, is there things that you just shouldn't do when it comes to playing a game, or, you know, the way you interact with your opponents?
Big, massive, yes, there are. So a huge one is wear pants. Like, definitely right now, you and I are just 2 guys sitting here who are both definitely wearing pants from the waist down.
That's why I love TTS, because there's no pants required.
Yeah. But right now, and at tournaments, you're always wearing pants. However, one of the things that I would say is like, for me, I can forgive a lot of things because I've gotten rules wrong. People have gotten rules wrong. In the early days of Azir, I remember playing a tournament and I had 7 heroes and it said my army was valid. And like Azir, the army thing, and we realized that I'd fucked up and had 7 heroes, been playing all day at a 1-dayer, and like we resolved it, but then afterwards I was like, oh, that wasn't quite fair. So I kind of messaged the tournament organizer and was like, can we change this up? And we all like, but shit happens, like it does. It's how you deal with it that really, really, really matters. I think that the big thing is like how you approach it and how you communicate about it as well. And I'm guilty of fucking that up just as much as the next person. Though I can forgive a lot from someone who has the right attitude, I think is the big thing. Because
you mentioned intention. Yeah. You mentioned intention before. Is that there are times where, for example, and this is why I love AOS reminders as a tool, is because it like has all your rules kind of, and if nothing more, it's just an opportunity. But there are so many rules, so many war scrolls, so many interactions, and there's also things like at the start, during, and at the end. And there have been plenty of times where there's something that I had to declare at the start that I might have tried to do at the end. And I've just been in the moment. I've been focusing. Like, I'll admit, I've made mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes. I think if you don't think you've made a mistake in this game, I think you're lying to yourself. It's about the intention. It's about pulling yourself up and learning from that mistake. If you notice during the game that you've made a mistake, apologize. See if, you know, what your opponent has to say. There's been a particular game at a tournament where I did something that I shouldn't have done. And I went up to the tournament organizer and said, listen, this is what I've done. Although I've won the game, I want to flip the results. Because I did something that I shouldn't have done, and it was impactful enough that my opponent's like, oh, no, don't do that. I said, no. If I didn't do that, that wouldn't have happened, and I don't think the outcome would have been the same. And I would rather walk away with a good, honest game than that. And especially, being a content creator, I think some people would just let me do my thing. But I'm like, look,
I would. You're gorgeous.
Questionable at best, but
you have a much better beard than me. Like, you not only have a more mighty beard, you have such a wonderful color diversity. I just have this odd patch of red here and a little bit of like odd stuff. And for some reason, since the last time I grew a beard, I have this odd chin butthole that just like it separates around.
I was going to ask you about your chin butthole.
I'm very self-conscious about it, my chin butthole. Let's just get that.
But I think to the point, before Dan distracts me, is that be honest. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with your opponent. Your opponent will respect you far greater. Because the thing that I would always hate, and I hope that no one out there in the world is talking about me this way, is I hope that no one's walked away thinking Anthony is a cheat, Anthony used his rules wrong, and he did this purposely. And I hope that, and I say this to everybody, is that I have the best intentions, and I hope everyone thinks that if anyone did anything wrong, it was a mistake. I think I probably picked up dice wrong. I probably used rules wrong. Whether it was a dice roll to hit was meant to be a wound roll, or whether it was an interaction was different. I think it's going to happen. But I think to what you said, it's the context. It's about owning it. And if you notice it, it's about pulling it up and seeing what you can do to move forward. As opposed to lying through the rest of the game. And then your opponent finds out and goes, wait a second. They can't do that.
Yeah. It's often, like I would say that as much as we like to think of ourselves as very, very worldly people, it's pretty obvious when people are often playing the fool in that regard. I mean, Hayden in the chat makes a really good point, being like, it's tough. Like, being generous and friendly is lovely, but it's really hard when you see people constantly taking advantage. And I agree, but what I would challenge is that in confronting someone about and I am in a training role now, which is so ill-advised, but I hope they never see this, is that I would argue that when you're confronting a behavior that you don't like, you have to not only think about confronting it. It's very easy to say, well, I'm just going to tell them I fucking hate it. The harder thing is to ask, how do you get the best result from what you're asking? And I would say that if someone's behaving poorly, or if you're noticing that they're being really generous with their movement, saying, oi, dickhead, I would like you to be more tight with your movements, you might get the response you want, but you're also putting them off. Whereas if you turn around and you notice that turn 1, they're being generous, or turn 2 or whatever, and then turn 3 starting, you're like, hey man, just want to let you know, this game feels like it's in the balance. I would really appreciate it if you and I could both just be really tight with each other on our rules and our measurements, just to make sure, because like, we obviously both want to win, and I'd like for both of us to be able to say we did it with an impeccable level of rules, like honesty. Sound fair? And if someone said that to me, I'd be like, yep, sweet. So it's not just about calling someone out, it's about doing it in a way that is going to have a positive outcome. Because if you tell them they're a dickhead, then they might, and they are a dickhead, they might be a dickhead. There are a lot of dickheads out there. I am one of them at oftentimes. But it's how you manage dickheads that matters.
Yeah. And if it truly becomes like, they're just not listening, this is the moment to call over a tournament organizer.
Yeah.
I can't stress enough how important calling over a tournament organizer is. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, you don't want to feel like the bad guy. But I would rather you call me over as a tournament organizer so I can resolve a problem than it could continue to escalate over 3 hours. And then as a tournament organizer, I always dragged into the end of the game. And I'm like, guys, I can't be... The game is over. What do you want me to do at this particular point? And all I can do is be a listening ear. So call over a friendly tournament organizer if you're required. But there are simple things that you can do. When you're measuring, be clear with your measurements, clear the intention. Use dice to kind of mark out where the movement might end. Right. I think we're all loose when it comes to piling in. So there is certainly
loose.
gives. There is gives, right? Like there is gives and there are takes. If I'm going to be really strict with my opponent, they're going to be really strict to me. And again, this is kind of where tension and escalation happens. But if you're noticing that someone is clearly stretching the rules, I think what you said is really good, is call them out, but don't call them out as if like you are a dickhead, but rather, make it a positive experience the best as possible. And if it's still happening, call over a judge, call over an event organizer, and kind of de-escalate the situation.
And yeah, for sure, like Hayden's saying, which is 100% right. Sometimes being like, hey, can I see the war scroll? And when I ask to see the war scroll, it's not because I think you're necessarily a liar. It's because maybe I have read the war scroll recently, knowing that I'm playing your army. And like myself, I'm guilty of it until I played Nathan when I was over at Warhammer World, who also plays dwarves. And he pointed out that Longbeard's war scrolls, one of their abilities, they'd changed the wording of it. Literally, like, it's the same ability, same thing. They'd changed the wording. Now, when the update had happened into the new edition, I'd scanned it and I was like, cool, yep, everything's the same, yep, cool, they're great, cool. And I'd been playing Longbeards at that point in time for years. And it wasn't until he pointed that out that I realized, holy shit, I've been playing it wrong. We are all completely guilty and completely fallible. Like, we can all do it. And I challenge anybody who plays competitive Warhammer, you do not recheck your war scrolls before each tournament. If you've been playing an army for 5 years, you might check it with an FAQ or an update, but before each game, you don't rock in there and be like, oh, I really hope I know what my ghouls do. Like, we're fallible. We make mistakes. When someone asks to see something, I am always very excited to show them, because I'm like, yeah, let me show you how many shades of ass I'm going to kick with my Iron Drakes. Like, let's do this. And sometimes you're wrong.
Let me take it one step further. Let me take this one step further. What I do in a tournament is I will let my opponent know that this is my battle tome, and they are welcome to read it if required. So if they want to know what my Witfire tome does, if they want to see the various interactions of my rules, because we all have the AOS mobile app and we've got all the war scrolls at our fingers. So if you do want to see what a rule does, you can do that. But things like spells, artifacts, command traits, blah, 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 they're going to be hiding in a tome. So letting my opponent know that these are my rules. And if you want to read how my rules work, I'm more than happy to do so, because again, I'm here for a clean, honest game. And that's a kind of like a little indication that this is going to be a good game. And my opponent's not going to walk away feeling like they've had a bad game, because they had the opportunity to do so.
And I think that is a huge level for a lot of people to aim for. And again, that's avoiding the gotcha play. It's avoiding, and you know what? If someone said it's a gotcha tournament before the game, you just need to tell people what's in your opponent. I'd kind of play that tournament. If you told me that it's a gotcha tournament, you do whatever the hell you want. No one sees your list beforehand except for the TOs. They come by every game and confirm that what you've put on the table is exactly what you had. You don't tell your opponent shit, and we play the game. I'd play that tournament. Like, not to say no, I'd play it. And I'd try to do some dirty, messed up crap. But my opponents would be expecting that, and I'd be expecting it of them. And again, that's where, for me, it is all about expectations and managing people's expectations. Now, that sounds like, again, that I'm saying that you should be expecting low, but it's not the case. It's telling them how do you feel that they're there. And yeah, I don't think you can go wrong doing it.
I want to ask you about the types of information that you tell your opponent before the game starts. But before you answer that question, again, I'm going to acknowledge Hayden in the chat. Another good question, and he talks about digital tools, and we're talking about some people have access to they bring. I bring it. I bring my tablet, especially because I travel a lot, play Warhammer, go overseas, domestically, I travel. And I have all of the battle tomes on my iPad. So when I'm at tournaments, I will often have my opponent's battle tome on my iPad as well. So if I do need to check the rules, again, they're welcome to do so. But if my opponent, if that was my battle tome, let's say I didn't have the physical copy, but I only had a digital copy, again, the invitation is there. Maybe I don't give them my iPad, but I might say to them, guys, if you want to check my rules, let me know, and I'm happy to bring up the battle tome. I'm happy to show you where it says in this particular artifact, spell, trait, allegiance ability. Again, it's being open and honest. That's the goal. That's the intention, and because I want to have a good game. I don't want to win, because when we talk, I gotcha is like the big surprise. It's like not telling my opponent that I could teleport and steal an objective at the end of the game.
Yeah.
If I didn't tell them that I had a teleport ability, they thought I'm just going to walk up the board and I'm just going to have to fight you.
Yeah, or like being like, okay, these guys are in the Shadow Strike host, and not telling your opponent that means they can deploy 3 inches away. Like in old Shadow Strike host rules. Definitely. I think as far as the digital stuff goes, as long as my one thing is that it's a legit version. I like to like if you rock up with War Scrolls that are printed out and they're the legit War Scrolls, totally fine with it. But if your PDF version of your battle tome is the legit PDF version, again, totally fine. But I don't love that they are there. I mean, first of all, pay where you play. I'm a big, big supporter of pay where you play. If you play games at a Warhammer store, pay at the Warhammer store. If you play games at your local store, pay at your local store. Buy some stuff online because it's cheaper. I don't fucking care. But have the legit stuff. And I think that for looking at it sometimes, I've definitely seen people who've rocked up with what are very clearly PDFs of scanned battle tomes. And I'm like, cool. However, I would love to check the real legit one just to know for myself that it's definitely straight up. So I would say that if it's legit, anything. And I've shown people, I necessarily because iPads are expensive, I've shown them on my iPad. I've never expected to hold their iPad. I'm like, you fucking hold it because I don't want to be responsible if I drop it. Can you just show me this? And then they show me and I'm like, sweet, we're great. You take your expensive techno gizmo away from me because I don't want any form of responsibility. Also, there's beers on the table. Keep it a safe distance from the beers. And I think that for me is where that there is a line there, in the same way that I personally, and I know that this is a personal thing, I don't like dice rolling apps because I play a dice game to roll dice. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. You're allowed to disagree with me. But if you can't roll the amount of dice necessary to play your game, you're in the wrong game. That's my opinion. Happy to be proven wrong. But I don't like dice rolling apps for that reason. And everyone's different. So
I shadow your thoughts. Yeah. By the way, 2 things before I do let you answer that question I did lead you towards. I thought of 2 taboos that I wanted to acknowledge as well from Taylor's question. One is don't roll my dice. So that is generally a taboo. COVID or no COVID, you should roll your dice. Yes, it is easier. Like if Dan, goes through the motions, hit to the wound, we got the damage. Yes, it is easier for me to pick up Dan's dice and roll Dan's dice, but it's rather taboo unless your opponent invites you to use their dice. Use your own dice. So that'd be kind of taboo one that I would acknowledge. In a similar vein, taboo number 2 is don't touch my models unless I invite you to do so. So if I'm trying to like remove combat or whatever, I might invite you to say, hey, can you just remove 5 dudes from combat? But don't touch someone's model, because I think, again, to the point of the breakage of the iPad, you also don't want to accidentally drop a model and it breaks or chips or you scratch it, because...
No, I was actually going to say, and I totally lost the plot of Taylor's question there, so thank you for pulling me back up on that. I was down a rabbit hole that I didn't know I'd fallen into. For me, it's models. The dice thing, The dice thing, I can understand that other people have differing views. Myself, I believe my luck rolls in my dice, and we are war dolly players who roll dice. I would argue that most of us are very superstitious about our dice. I have microwaved a dice while lining a die, while lining up the other die of that type in front of the microwave as an example to them, to be like, just so you know, if you don't improve, this is what will happen to you.
This is your fate.
Yeah.
I've got 3D printed dice jails. Just like the dice jail. Like,
yes.
You rolled too many ones when I didn't need you to roll ones, and you rolled sixes when I didn't need you to roll six. You go to jail.
Dice shaming. I'm about it. I'm totally aligned with it. Dice shaming is necessary. So touching the dice is a taboo for me, but it is also one where the logical part of my brain can accept that people have a different opinion, and sometimes it's easier if I've rolled a bunch of dice rather than me counting it out and then them counting. They're like, yeah, it's going to be quicker to do this. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand it.
At least ask. At least ask. I think is the key. I think the key here is ask. Like, do you want me to roll your dice or do you want me to roll my dice? Like, at least get that foundation right, as opposed to just assuming.
But touching your opponent's models is, for me, the biggest and greatest taboo of our hobby. Unless you are directly invited, and even then, I ask for them to be specific as to which models they want me to touch. And sometimes it doesn't matter. It'll be, oh, can you just, they'll roll the charge and they're like, can you just move him into that? And because gameplay wise, it probably doesn't matter at that point. And you're like, great, yeah, cool. I'll just move them there. Is that good? Cool. However, yeah, you don't touch your opponent's models without invitation. And even then, and it's not a request. You don't ask to touch their models. You wait for the offer to be made. We are a delicate and beautiful butterfly that is wrapped in a cocoon, and we have spent many hours building and painting our models. I don't care how good a builder or painter you are. They could be like melted by plastic glue to the point that they are unrecognizable and only like sprayed and shaded. I still don't touch my opponent's models with anything less than respect, and not until they offer first. And oftentimes at tournaments, it's because you can't be bothered walking like 200 meters that way to get around that end and then coming back down to remove them and then walking back around. But still, touching your opponent's models is the biggest and baddest taboo. And it's only ever happened a couple of times where someone's done it to me. And I was like, huh. And I will straight up say to people, because as far as I'm concerned, the possibility of one of my models being damaged is worth the 10 seconds of awkward conversation where I'm like, hey, I understand it's not the same for everyone, but my models are my children. I love them more than I could ever love a human child. So please, I just need to give you the heads up to touch them. And most people are like, oh, I'm so sorry, dude. I didn't realize. And I'm like, yeah. I'm not attached to people the way I am attached to my bearded, beautiful miners. So that's totally cool. I understand.
And anyone who's ever had to glue a model at a tournament while trying to play would know the frustrations of a breakage. So you want to avoid that.
Because you know that you could leave it broken, but you're like, no, I came all this way and I will stab you with my trident.
I remember playing Clint with at Masters, and he had his Abyssal Terror. He had, I think, Manfred, and the tail had snapped. And we tried to play this game, and we're trying to glue down Manfred, or it might have been Arcan. But long story short, like it is a super wobbly model, so we didn't get that far. Mm-hmm. But I did ask you another question. I did ask, what are the type of things that you'll ask your opponent, or you'll tell your opponent about your army? Because we've talked a lot, and we've danced around I gotchas a lot. Mm. So I gotcha is basically a surprise that you didn't tell your opponent, and if they knew the information, they may have played differently, or at least potentially factored it in. Mm-hmm. So I never tell my opponent everything. I'm not going to tell them literally everything. I'm not going to tell them what my best unit is and how I'm going to beat them, and I'm not going to tell them everything. But I'm still going to be very open about the information I share with them. What are the things that you share with your opponent, and then I can share some of the things that I would share with mine?
I'll tell them anything that they would like. It's more efficient because in a perfect world, we would know who we're playing a day in advance, and we'd sit down and read everything we can about their army and their army list, and then we'd rock up and we would just deploy and say nothing, and in silence we would stare at each other like poker players. But we play this game to be social, or I assume we do. Maybe in the future that's what's going to happen. So for me, I share everything I can. And in that, I mean everything that I can that doesn't give away how I will play my army. I will tell you what my army is, what everything does, and the things that like maybe like I don't want them to misjudge things would be a big one. Like if I tell you like I will like when I was playing Dispossessed, I would try to impress upon my opponent that Iron Drakes, my opinion, are point for point the best shooters in the game. These are their rules. They're badass. And I'll tell you this, and I'll tell you then the heroes, and I'll tell you everything. But I won't say that. And it might be for someone who's played a fair bit of the game or who's read up on my army, might know what I am planning on doing with them. But I'm not going to say my game plan is that I'm going to do X, Y, and Z and blah, 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 blah. I think for me, it's like if you were playing chess against someone and the pieces did certain things, but you could take different pieces, it's telling your opponent, like, I have pawns, they can do this. I have knights, they can do this. I have that. And explaining to your opponent how your army works. The big one for me is army-wide and like conditional special rules, because they're the ones that can get lost a little bit. So it's useful explaining that. But no, I don't expect my opponent to tell me my trogs do this and my blah blah does this and my blah blah has this spell. And when I combine them all, they turn into Captain Planet. I don't need to know that. But what I would love to know is what each of those independently do. And then either I'm smart enough to work that out, or I'm just like, fucking let's go. And it happens to me. And I'm like, that was incredibly horrifying. But I'm really glad that it was an experience I had. And I think that is a really hard one for some people to realize, is that your opponent doesn't need to tell you everything. They don't need to tell you how their army works. They don't need to tell you their strategy. They don't need to tell you how the combos work. I just need to know that they're not hiding a rule from me. Like if you were to go through the Gaunt Summoner and tell me everything about their summoning rule, I'd be like, okay, that's fucked. Whereas, or like your pink horrors, when you put your pink horrors on the table, if you didn't tell me what they were capable of in just infinitely replicating, I would be pretty surprised. And I think that for me is the level of explanation you need to give.
Yeah, I think that's where you really do get to set the scene when it comes to being a good sport. So some of the things that I like to ask my opponent is things like, have you played this army before? Because some people, they don't want war and peace. They've played Khorne a million times, so you don't need to explain to them how blood tithe work. That they've seen Hexgorge's skull, so they don't need to know that there's going to be X, Y, and Z, and if I roll an 8, it's automatically unbound, and all this stuff. But it might be understanding, like, what's your experience levels? Is this the first time you played Cities of Sigmar, or have you played this a million times? And they go, oh no, a person at my games club plays Cities of Sigmar. I go, cool. Have they played Halo Heart? And they're like, oh no, they're playing one that they come from the side. So, well, actually, okay, my army's different. Let me explain it.
Very different, yeah.
Very different. And obviously Cities is just one example. But there's things that I want to make sure that they know. Things like, am I deploying all of my army on the table at the same time? Or can I put some things in reserves? And if I do have things like reserves, like let's say Shadow Warriors, the conditions of them having to be on the table by turn 4, and they come in 9 inches or more from the enemy. So they need to know that. Now, I'm not going to tell them where the Shadow Warrior is going to go. I will tell them I get +1 to hit, +1 to wound when they're in cover, but they need to know that this will be in reserve, and this is how I can bring them in. I might want to let them know some of my threat ranges. So I might say to them, and this might be a question you want to ask your opponent is, how fast is your army? Or can you turn 1 charge me?
That's a big one.
Like, can you turn 1 charge me? Because the moment you realize that you're playing a Maw Crusher, you're like, oh, I can handle that. I'll give you first turn. All of a sudden they charge you. You're like, oh, I wouldn't have done that if I knew that you could have turned 1 charge me, because I want to put down all of my buffs. I need a command point. I want to try to cast a spell. So things like that. Things like, can you turn 1 charge me? Or how fast can you move in the first turn? Can you teleport during the game? What's a spell that I need to, what's the most damaging spell that you've got? there might just be a couple of questions so that when it comes to, again, Halo Heart, I might have 8 to 10 spells to cast. You don't have 8 to 10 unbinds. So what's that 1 or 2 spell that you might want to focus on should we get to that point?
Yeah. And there's a difference between telling people what your spells are and trying to hide your key spell and being like, so you tell them like 4 spells. And I've seen people guilty of it, and I'm like, I know your tricks, where they tell you like the first 4 spells that are fucking meaningless but sound scary, and then they slip in that one just quietly in the middle, and then they go dig dig dig, and so they're trying to draw out your unbinds on other ones. And I'm like, cool, I see your games, that's cool. But yeah, I think like for me, one of the big ones is I always make clear, especially if I have an army that has things that can like redeploy mid-game or teleport or things that deploy off the board, before we start the game, I will make abundantly clear to them what makes that happen, how often I can do it, and like what can do it. Because that for me is a huge one that the question is, I ask myself what I really want to know from my opponent, and I try to give my opponent that information.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good one to think, is it's like, if you would be pissed off to not know something about your opponent's army, tell your opponent that in your own.
I've seen, so I used to do this. I don't do it anymore. I probably should do it. But I remember when I used to play the Free Guild, or they used to be called Free People, which now has been brought into the Cities of Sigmar. And
Unlike
they used to have
Dispossessed, who still maintain their own independence.
By the way, I'm running Dispossessed currently in TTS.
Oh,
so
no!
But it's in a Halo Heart. It's in a Halo Heart army.
Oh,
so,
never mind. Not as.
So it's in so it's in like this anti-magic immunity. But I remember. So Cities of Sigmar had this really complex. Sorry, these free people had this really complex rules interaction where basically you'd put these units in a battalion. Essentially, it's not even a battalion. It was like I pick 3 units.
Company.
The Great Company, yes. So you'd go, I got a unit of swordsmen, I've got my crossbowmen, and I've got my handgunners. And if you charge my swordsmen, my handgunners, and my crossbowmen are going to shoot you before combat starts. And there was a couple of conditions with it, and it was very complex. And usually, it was like turn 2, turn 3, I would actually use the rule. But what I would do is I would write down like a little cheat sheet, or on my army list, I would actually have a couple of key bullet points that they might want to know, such as the way the Great Company works, maybe how many drops that I've got, maybe some of the spells. So again, if you're looking to improve your game, there are ways that you can again show sportsmanship and go, look, here's some of the things you might want to know, or the things that you might most have a question to ask about.
Yeah, and see, those little things that you can give your opponent, I think are, I always love. Like, I always work out for my army what my minimum and maximum drops are, so that I can rock up to the table and be like, sweet, I am a 3 or a 13. I'm a 3 to 13. And then when my opponent, and because we know the question, we can spend 5 minutes backing and forthing, but ultimately if you're like, this is my minimum drop, whoever has the lowest drops is going to choose. So if we just go, I'm a 3 to 13, and you go, I'm a 1 to 11, I'm like, sweet, you drop twice, and then the rest of your army, and then I drop the rest of mine. Makes it like, that sounds fair, right? And they're like, yep. So we go 1-1, they do theirs, and then I do mine. Rather than the whole like monkey knife fight from The Simpsons on the deck of a yacht, where we're going like, oh, but maybe I'll do this, and maybe I'll do this. And then if my opponent drops the wrong unit, rather than me going, aha, yeah, you activated my trap card, you fucked up, and now I get to do, you just go, mate, is that exactly what you wanted to do? And they're like, it is not. Because I've done that before, and I wonderfully had an opponent who was like, he's not in the battalion, though. He's in the battalion, isn't he? Or whatever. And I was like, yep. And they're like, so you can't finish your drop next turn. And I went, correct. Absolutely correct. I have snookered myself. Congratulations. And he was like, nah, dude, just swap to the other thing and whatever, and we'll go from there. You obviously would have done that. You are just in game 5 of day 2 and you're very drunk. And I was like, you are a blessed scholar for giving me this moment. And I don't expect everyone to give everyone that opportunity, but it is the intent thing. And I think that that's a huge, for me, that's huge, is if you build that with your opponent, they're likely to be a lot more understanding of those things. And I'll be that much more understanding with you too.
You're right. You kind of segued into somewhere I wanted to explore, and that was forgetting rules. Now, there's been plenty of times where my opponent, for example, has gotten really excited in their, I don't know, their hero phase, and they've cast a whole bunch of spells, but then they forgot to use a command ability, or they forgot to activate something. And now they're in the movement phase and they're like, oh crap, I forgot something. Or maybe they're in combat and they wanted to activate and they forgot shooting before the charge, right? How do you work with someone who has forgotten a rule or has forgotten a phase? Do you allow them to go back? Do you is there a methodology on when you would let someone do something versus when you haven't let somebody do it? Because I've got some scenarios where there've been times where I've said, sorry, we're too far progressing this game that you can't do that. So a prime example was I remember playing an opponent where they got to attack in the hero phase, but before they did that, they wanted to apply their buffs, and they started moving their units. And it's like, well, wait a second, we can't go back because we can't go back to see what was in range and what you could synergize. And there was some, at the time, there was some like wholly within 8s, wholly within 12s. So they're quite small kind of radiuses. So I guess to the question, how do you handle someone, or how do you handle an opponent if they were like, oh, I forgot something, or do you give them the courtesy? Is there times that you would do it and you wouldn't do it, and what's the difference?
My rule of thumb is abject fairness, because it's really hard to disagree with that. So the rule that I hold my opponents to is the same rule that I hold myself to, is that if the decision missed makes a change on on a decision that you are up to, or like that you have made, then you don't get to go back. So for example, if it's like you get to the charge phase and you're like, holy crap, I forgot to shoot with this, I'd be like, for sure you would have shot with that, and it hasn't changed any decision you've made yet, so go back and shoot with it. Or if they forgot to use a command ability, if they forgot to whatever it is that they forget, if it hasn't changed the shape of the game, I will let you do it. And I wouldn't expect it any differently. So for example, if I have a command ability that gives me +1 attack against something, and I forget to use it, and I roll all my hits and I roll all of my attacks, and then I don't kill it, and I go, ah, oh, damn, I forgot to use my command ability there, I wouldn't expect my opponent to let me go back and use that command ability. Not for the world expect it, because if I had done that command ability, maybe I wouldn't have charged 2 units into it, maybe I would have shot differently, maybe I would have done something else differently. But if it was literally, I moved these models up and then I meant to use an ability in the charge phase that would have let them get onto an objective, but I forgot because I was so distracted by this crazy combat, and it literally will affect nothing else, then that is something that I would expect I would allow my opponent to do, because it's not having an impact on any other decisions they've made. And that for me is like, that's the black and white of it. Would having remembered that have changed what you've done since? If the answer is yes, you can't go back. If the answer is no, you would have done it anyway, then let's rewind the clock and let's do it. Because ultimately, I was probably expecting you to. And again, it's a gotcha thing. That's a gotcha moment of, gotcha, you forgot.
Yeah. And that was very old school Warhammer Fantasy, where, there are a lot of war scrolls, there's a lot of books, there's a lot of things we need to remember. And there's been plenty of times where, and I think the biggest I gotcha moments that are probably across the board at the moment is unbinding an endless spell or dispelling an endless spell. Because it happens at the start of the hero phase.
Yeah.
And people are so excited about, right, I've got my command points, I need to be able to do a bunch of spells, I'm going to try to buff this and move this, and they're thinking 100 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And then they go, oh, crap. Halfway through their casting, they're like, oh, crap. I was meant to unbind the Everblaze Comet because I wanted to then recast it. Now, they were going to do that. Or they were always, they've got these Geminids out there that you want to like, it's hit them. It's kind of hit them and like, right, I've got to get rid of those Geminids so I can cast them back at my opponent. So it's like this. And there's also like, depending on my opponent, depending on the relationship, there's been plenty of times where, like, game one or game two, I'll look at my opponent and I'll say, no, you can't do this because it's a teaching moment. I want you to remember to do this for your next couple of games. I'm not being a jerk. It looks like I'm being a jerk, but you will now remember every time you cast an Everblaze Comet, you're going to unbind that. And when you move into other games, you'll remember this lesson.
I think that's the thing is, like, I hold myself to the standard that I hold my opponent to. But if my opponent were to say that to me, I'd be like, yep, for sure. Completely understand. Totally fair. I'm happy to roll with that. It's the point where I would have a problem with it would be where my opponent disagrees with what I've decided and then applies a different logic to themselves. And I think that is
correct. If I then go around trying to say, oh no, can we go back? Is it okay? And like if you're going to walk the walk, you got to talk the talk. So you need to be able to do the same thing. And I've actually seen that done really well, where someone actually challenged them, said, you didn't let me do this. It's literally the same situation. I'm not letting you do this. And like, yeah, fair call.
Yeah. I mean, we saw it in that really famous Warhammer 40k clip from a couple of years ago where someone was like, no, mate, you did this to my friend in the last game, so I am sure as surely doing it to you this game. And that's it. You build a set of expectations around yourself, and then I don't care if you want your opponent to fit within it, as long as you expect to fit within it yourself.
One more little idea that I just had before I move on to my next question. We talked about dice. We talk about, taking away your misses and leaving your hits on the table. Another one as well is a concept called cock dice, where basically you roll a dice and it's kind of tilted, or it's not quite clear that's it's flat.
Yeah.
So when a dice is cocked, I will always re-roll that dice because it's not clear what the outcome was. So I'll re-roll that dice so it's on a flat surface and we can tell. That's another way for sports.
And for me, I don't mind what your side of that is, as long as you're fair and clear. So I'll say to my opponent before the game, I'm the same. Unless it is flat, I'm going to re-roll it, regardless of who it benefits, regardless of whether it's the tiniest little slant. I will re-roll that dice every single time. And now, I just to avoid the awkward conversation to turn in, I'll ask my opponent, what will your version of that be? Like, because some people are like, if I put a dice on top and it doesn't fall off, it's fair game. And I'm like, great, solid. I don't care what your answer to that question is. Or I've had people who have said, like, if it's cocked, whichever side is the most facing is the one that I will go by. And I'm like, sweet. As long as that's the commitment that you're going to have for the rest of the game, I'm fine with it. Me, I want my dice flat. You like your dice curly. I don't care what the answer is, as long as you are consistent in what you expect.
Counting wounds is another example of that, where I always count up. So as I take damage, my dice will go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, because for me personally, that aligns to the behemoth table quite well. So I can clearly see that, it's taken 4 wounds, so I'm at this profile. But some people as well, they count down. So it's one of those questions as well when you're playing is, do you count up, do you count down with your wounds? And again, applying consistency. I don't care how you do it. This is how I do it. I'm just going to make sure that when I see that the counter that says 4 on your Terrorgeist, is that 4 wounds left? Or is that 4 wounds taken? And I should be able to clearly understand what that means for you, and you should know what that means for me.
Yeah, I realized that I am not good at that with myself. So I trust my opponent to be good at keeping an eye on them, and I'll keep an eye on them. But I'm like, I am not good, or I'll pick up the dice that was a wound counter because I get excited or whatever. And some people use different dice. So now I just use little blood markers for mine. And I'm like, every wound that they take, I add a blood marker to it. So I'm effectively counting up. And the pile of blood beside them is how much they're bleeding. Because if I put dice beside them, I will mess it up. Also, I find that for me, the reason I choose to do that is I can't accidentally take a blood counter off the table. You can accidentally knock a dice. You can accidentally pick up and roll a dice in the heat of the moment. It happens to everybody. Where you've been playing the game and then you roll and you're like, he had some number of wounds on him. bugger me if I remember what it was. I think it was 2. Was it 2? I don't know. It was 2. Maybe it was 2. Okay, let's go with 2. And it could have been any number. Whereas, like, I use these little... The biggest danger with my little red cubes from Green Stuff World is they look like jellies and would be very easy to eat, and they look edible. They look so, so edible. And given that I do like to have a drink at a tournament, I one day see myself eating one. And it's probably
Delicious.
very carcinogenic. Very delicious for sure, but gonna...
And then you and Jacob Berry will have something in common when it comes to consuming things that you shouldn't be consuming from the tabletop.
Here, that boy has an iron stomach, and I don't even want to know about his intestines.
But you raise something that is not a D6 or a D12.
Yeah.
A dice that is clearly not my regular dice. But you're right, it can be knocked over. And if it ever got knocked over, I will always go with what my opponent says. If I think it was seven wounds taken and my opponent thinks it's 8 or 9, I will go with them because it was my fault that I knocked over the dice. I should have been tracking it a better way. So again, I don't want to. I'm gonna be honest and fair.
I think, and that's a big point to being like, you are responsible for your own actions. So if you make a mistake, you are responsible for resolving it in the best way possible for the person who didn't make it. In the same way that in a contractual dispute, ambiguity in the contract is to the benefit of the partner that didn't write the contract. A mistake in War Dollies is to the benefit of the person who did not make the mistake. That would be my legal tender to this conversation.
I love it.
Also, I ran out of mixer a little while ago, so I've been drinking straight Bacardi for a while. Full disclosure.
Love it. I love it. So I think we've had some pretty cool discussions so far. One that I'm going to ping you on because this was the first moment that I remember Dan being an absolute gentleman when it comes to being a sport. I don't know if you know where I'm going with this one, but you will quickly remember.
That's why I'm scared.
BrizCon 2017. I remember playing on a table next to you, and you had these objective markers, and you had 6 of them or 5 of them, and you gave each of your opponents an objective marker as a grudge. And you said, I want you to take this objective marker. It was like a little resin piece. And you had said, I want you to keep it, but know that I want to collect it back off you the next time we play. And it was a nice little way of like Book of Grudges, a token and gesture to kind of give your opponent a little gift and a reminder of that game. So what I want to ask you, do you remember that?
I do. I still do it when I can. Because I kind of like the idea of everybody swapping objectives and then trying to collect the ones they've lost and whatnot. I kind of dig that.
So let me ask you about bribery versus sportsmanship. What are your thoughts on giving your opponent a pre-game gift or buying your opponent a drink? Is it something you do often? I certainly do it, especially when I go overseas. When I've gone to Blood and Glory, I went to LVO. I went over with some like Australian little gift bags for my opponents, some beers, some Tim Tams and different things. But where do you stand when it comes to a pre-game gesture?
As far as like a sportsmanship vote goes, I couldn't give 2 fucks. To be honest,
it's not the intention. You're not there to bribe somebody.
Like I've honestly had a couple of unpleasant games where I've given them the objective token, and I fully expect that those players have then thrown it out and never thought of it again. I've also had people who I then rocked up to play again at the next tournament who had desecrated it and covered it in bone splitters filth and been like, I was hoping I'd face you again. Remember that Dwight statue you gave you? And I was like, yes. And then they showed it to me covered in excrement. And I was like, I will destroy you. For me, it's more about building connections and those wonderful little stories. I'm very passionate about the hobby and I like sharing it. And I think like for me being over here, I had a bunch of, for one thing that I couldn't take to America, I had the Everblaze Comet, and the first tournament I played in was held on Easter. So I converted my Everblaze Comet to hold a Kinder Egg because Kinder Eggs are my favorite thing in the entire world. If you look on my Instagram, there's a video of me on my 30th birthday. I was given 30 and I threw them into the air and just let them rain on me like a delicious white chocolate, milk chocolate rain.
They're
And
illegal
so-
in America as well, aren't they?
Yeah, oh yeah, can't cross the border. Couldn't take it to the LVO. But because obviously they're dangerous. Children can have an AK-47, but they can't have an Easterblaze Comet. Political, not we're talking about it. But I renamed it in my list the Easterblaze Comet. And every person that I played, every time I summoned it, I had a bag of 15, and every time I summoned my Easterblaze Comet, they got a Kinder Surprise. And I insisted that they make the toy in front of me because I'm a child that wanted to see the toy. And then we would use the toys as objective markers, and we replaced the objective markers with Shrek or whatever the hell the toy was at the time. And it was a lot of fun. But the intent for me in that moment had nothing to do with sportsmanship. It was because I was like, this is funny. This is a great joke. And I really enjoy Kinder Surprise, and I want to share it with you in the same way that for yourself, as an Australian, you want to share Tim Tams with people. Or I've played people here in Canada who were like, I bought you Timbits. I'm like, what the hell are Timbits? And then I eat them and they're revolutionary. And I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't tried Timbits yet, but they're from Tim Hortons and they're great. And I think that some people maybe, yes, that is their intention, and that's really sad that for them it's a purchase and it's a transaction. But I think that there are enough of us that are just passionate about the hobby. We're passionate about the game. We're passionate about whatever it is. There are people out there who dress up as monks and shave their heads for tournaments. And I think we all know who I'm talking about. And that, for me, I would rock up against that.
Or Ninja Turtle costumes.
Possibly, or they all dress up as Ninja Turtles. Who knows who enforced that on people who didn't.
Not talking about Dan dressing up as a Ninja Turtle.
I, at a team tournament, once made every member of my team buy and dress up as one of the Ninja Turtles, despite the fact that poor Dan Brewer was far too tall for the largest size in the costume, and that thing tried to bisect him from trunk to skunk. But it was fun and it was great. And I think that the majority of people, when they're doing these things, that's their intent. And I agree that sometimes the minority of people may want to use it to purchase sports or to conceal something. But the larger truth for me is that if somebody does something for me like that before game, even if they buy me a beer, I'm like, it's not, for me, I don't consider it to be anything towards sports. The game is separate to that moment. All I realize is that they're a human being who's done a really lovely thing.
Yeah, 100%. There's been plenty of times where, and this is often I've seen this become popular recently, and that is at the end of the game, especially when the game kind of goes one way, the winner will often ask the opponent, "Can I buy you a drink?" Yeah. And should there be any bad taste or the opponent's not feeling good, at least we can go have a beer, have a drink, and just have a general chit chat that has nothing to do with the game and the game on the tabletop. I've seen plenty of times where people have said, "Hey, look, I've deployed. I'm just going to get a drink. Can I buy you a drink?" There's been times where when I played with my Goomspike Gits, I went to IKEA, and IKEA had these little like gummy mushrooms. So I had this little bowl at every tournament I'd go to, and every time I'd eat my mushroom for my Gits to get my pluses to cast, I would eat a gummy mushroom. But I would, it would be some lollies or some snacks that my opponent is welcome to eat. Should they want to eat it. But it has nothing to do with me bribing. It's just me being a good human. So again, there's, whether you want to give them a token. I remember playing in the teams tournament with Martin Orlando, and we painted each other a model and we traded that in preparation, which was really nice. I made him a Lord Ordinator in his army scheme, and he painted me a little loon boss. That was another way we could kind of demonstrate sportsmanship in something that we'd never met each other in real life. I think that, to your point, they're nice gestures, but not necessarily I'm going to bribe people to make me think that I'm the best sport in the world.
I think that if the intent is to bribe people for things, it's very obvious. Whereas it's because it's clear that there's an ulterior motive. You can tell when you meet someone if their reason for doing something nice for you is because they're excited and they're happy and they're enjoying themselves and they want to share this with you. Yes, the world is not always perfection, but I don't know. It's definitely happened to me once where I was like, oh, I see through your games. But every other time it's been purely based out of love. And to be honest, the reason that I give people, whenever I play Dispossessed, a Dispossessed objective at tournaments is I want to remind them that Dispossessed exist. And I also want to remind them that if I win, that they lost to Dispossessed. I want them to have a solid and enduring reminder that they lost to my non-existent faction.
Yes, Jack from Rerolling Ones, gummy edible mushrooms. I quickly had a look to see if I had any on my counter still. Unfortunately not, but they're little gummies that you can get from IKEA. They sell them in the little shop.
The one thing I'll flag though for you, Coach, is that edible has a very different impact behind it between where you are and where we are right now.
I did say gummy. So
yeah, no, gummy, fine. They are still gummy here. I was given what looked like a packet of Skittles that left me twitching for a very long time. Rerolling Ones, Jack asks a very good question that I was
going to bring that up. I want to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions.
Okay,
though,
sure.
And I will get to Jack's question.
Yeah,
the rapid fire question I've got for you, because we've kind of talked about the tabletop, right? And we will get to Jack's question in a second. Is the usage of mobile phones. Now, I see people kind of sitting on the fence here. So one, thoughts around using mobile phones during the game. Two, social media interaction. 3, taking photos. What are your thoughts from a sportsmanship point of view about taking photos, social media, and using mobile phones? They all interlink.
Okay, sweet. Using your mobile phone, for me, is a big negative for communicating with people. You're here to communicate with me. It's a Tinder date. It's probably our first date. If it's at a tournament, we're on a very strict time pressure, and if you're sitting there messaging people, if it's an emergency and you're like, hey, this has happened, I'm so sorry, I'd be like, dude, you take all the time you need. But if it's just you're messaging your mates, I'm not about it. I also don't like the possibility, like there's that devil's advocate in the back of all of our head that's just like, they're messaging someone about how to beat you. Like, or like they're asking questions.
I find it disengaging. I find it like I don't mind people being on their phones because I can't stop someone from not dealing with real life for 3 hours. Mm-hmm. But it's often like the length of their if they're sitting there while I'm doing my whole thing for 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And they're not paying attention, and then they ask questions like, "Oh, what? How many do you have to roll again? What's the number?" And you can clearly see they're not paying attention. That's a problem for me.
No, well, you're here to play me. You're not here to play Susanna that you've been messaging. And bless you, I'd love to know how your Tinder game's going, but I'm here for war dollies, and relationships can wait until after my Warden King's taken your Goblin Loon boss's head off, which is a thing that would happen 100% of the time, every single time. Don't you agree?
No. No.
So yeah, mobile phones I don't love. Now, social media, I am about within reason. Like if it's kind of like I've had a number of people, and I've done it myself, where before game I'm just like, shit, yeah, let's grab a photo, or after game I'm like, let's grab a photo, and then we go and play the game. I'm about that. I don't mind it. I think it's fun. It's expanding it. But if it's every turn, every moment, everything, that's when I'm like, cool. I'd love. Again, it's imagine the person you're playing is a first date, and they're saying that their eyes are up here, not down on your phone.
Yeah,
might be it. And the last one there is taking photos. Love it, all about it. But again, within reason. Like if something remarkable happens, or if there's a particularly cinematic shot, like I've legitimately played people that I've been like, this is where this is happening. Can we do this just because the cinematics look better? And if they're like, cool, and then I'll take great pains to make sure that we like perfectly replicate where they were afterwards. But sometimes like You have an unforged charging into like Gordrak, and we know how that story plays out. But gosh, it's a funny photo. And like that for me is a great one to do, but it's within reason. If you're doing that every 30 seconds, I'd be like, again, we're here for war dollies, not for taking a ton of photos.
My 2 cents on the issue, by the way, is mobile phone. I think we just need to lean into it. As a trainer, I work in learning and development. I can't ignore people not playing with their phones, but it's how do I minimize that and lean into it. So we've got our mobile, we've got the app, we've got the Age of Sigmar app. So people might be using that for their rules. Cool. I'm a big believer of taking photos, but again, to your point, it's about taking photos, but not paying attention. So I want to make sure that I'm still paying attention. I'm taking photos at appropriate times. I will always take a photo with my opponent. I'll ask them if they're on Twitter or Instagram and tag them. I might take a photo of the battlefield, so like just after deployment. But I'm only take a couple of games during the game. I won't be taking photos every single round and every single combat. When it comes to mobile phones, just keeping it to a minimum, and you might only pick it up at key moments, and like movement phase might be an example where it's probably least interactive. But when it comes to hero phase, I need to be able to unbind, or if it's combat, so I've got to work priority and pile-ins. Mobile phones down, not touching it.
Yep. I remember having, I think it was a butcher that had an unbind and managed to unbind Nagash on an absurd roll. And I was like, can I grab a photo of that? Because I rolled dub sixes on this roll, and I love the idea that my smelly, sweaty butcher just said no to Nagash, and my opponent was like, you better believe that that's fantastic. But if I was to then ask to take a photo every time my butcher did anything, that's maybe pushing the friendship a touch.
Yeah. And it's context, it's timing, it's just it's about being present in the moment. So if you are going to break away,
it's self-awareness. Anything, and checking rules, entirely fine. Don't mind checking, like looking at my rules, your rules, looking at things, making plans, sitting there, great. But every time that you choose to disengage from the game, I'd just ask that it's for a decent reason, and it's not because you're like, oh, I don't, just because it feels like you don't care. And again, treat your games of War Dollies like you're wooing someone. Treat it like you care. Treat it like you're interested. Now, you know what? You guys spend a lot of time flirting on Tinder, so you may as well enjoy the game.
I feel like this is a moment that I should end the show, but I can't end the show because I've got Jack's question and I got one more. I got one more question I want to ask. But
no, let's do it. I'm about it. I don't care.
That was a bit like a kumbaya kind of. Let's all hug. Warhammer is the best.
I mean, and you know what? Let's be completely honest. Just to step away from the feel good moment for a minute. We're not always going to be like that. We're not always going to be hugging. We're not always going to be all getting on the same side and positive. Things are going to go wrong. And I think a bigger telling thing that we haven't touched on that isn't a big conversation, if you've got two brain cells to rub together, it's the truth, is when we disagree, a big sign of how good a player you are and how good a person you are is how you handle disagreements. And it's tricky. It's a complex minefield that's different with every single situation. But how you handle a disagreement with your opponent speaks miles more than how you handle all of the positive agreements.
Well said. Well said. Because you will disagree. In the heat of the moment, in the heat of the battle, there are times where things will you want them to go your way as much as you want them to go your way. And you can rules lawyer and argue until the cows come home. But, this is where there's been plenty of times where we've rolled it off on the old, on a 4+, I get the rule. On a 3+, you get your rule. Or you call over the TO. I remember there's been a couple of times where I've called a tournament organizer and said, look, this is the situation. This is what I believe. This is what my opponent believes. Step back. What is your neutral interpretation? I'm not going to try to influence the judge. This is how we see it. Yeah. What's your perspective? And if the judge rules against me, I accept that and I continue. I don't argue. I don't try to continue it. I don't try to prove my point. If the TO rules it rightly or wrongly against me, then we go with the decision. That's why they're there.
Yeah, and whether a short distance in the future you find out that maybe that wasn't the right rule, that doesn't matter. That was the call on the ground. How many games of bloody tennis or cricket do we realize they didn't challenge the umpire and it turns out the umpire was wrong? That the umpire is there for a very specific reason, and we all accept that. If you didn't like the umpire, don't take place in the game.
We're human.
And
we make mistakes.
we do, and I am very quickly to forgive it from people that make mistakes and will like embrace it and roll with it. So sorry. That aside, you had a question before we get to Jack's question.
No, we'll get to Jack's, and then we'll go to Jack. We'll ask you the final question, and then we'll kind of close things out.
Okay, right.
Jack's question is, what happens if someone basically told you that their goal was to win best opponent? How would you take that? I've never experienced that, by the way.
Me neither. That was their goal. I've told people before that is the award that I find the most important and that I am the most proud of having won. But that's their goal, to win best opponent. That's a challenge, because I think if someone were to say that to me, I would challenge them and be like, fair. And if at the end of this you are my best opponent, fair enough. But I'm a pretty decent judge of character, so you're going to need to be genuine with me. And I love like that knowledge that I've played people who I have made enough of an impact on, and they've enjoyed the game against me enough for it to be one of their favorites. That's my highlight, and I won't deny that. But to say that I want to win best opponent seems odd.
I would never tell somebody that was my intention. If it might be, maybe it is my intention. Maybe that is my goal. I would never tell my opponent, because I feel like the moment you declare that is your goal, the pressure is on. It's a bit weird. I think anyone who I vote as a true best sports is someone that earns it over time. They don't need to tell me they're a good sport. They don't need to tell me they're a good human. You can tell a good human is a good human.
Yeah, I'm a piece of trash human. I've won best opponent a couple of times, so like for sure, that should be evidence that that you can rise from the mud and still be worthy.
And as Zach said, seems like the best opponent is unlikely to say that they're their best.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely say that I'm the best all the time to my opponents. Like, I want them to know that Dwight are the best and are superior in all things. Even when I was playing Gutbusters, I was telling my opponents that Dwight were the best, and this was a secondment. But telling your opponent that you're the best opponent, or that's what you're going for, it seems like an oxymoron to me. Like, it seems like counterintuitive logic. However, there are people who say that I want to win the tournament and then win the tournament. It could happen. It could happen. I would love to be a fly on the wall of every one of that opponent's games and work out why. Because I have definitely said to people that I care more about sports votes and best opponent votes than I do about my overall standing in the tournament. I am very guilty of that, but that's because that's just for me where my priorities in War Dollies lie. But the idea that it would change that that's a really, I need to think about that.
Right.
That's like, you know, that story about the samurai or whatever who stabbed through the assassin without doing anything and just like ninja'd them. That's that kind of moment for me. It's.
All right, thanks, Jack. We've now got Dan going up to the mountaintop.
You broke me.
Pondering this question.
I'm gonna need to think and probably be sober for the first time.
All right, I'm going to bring you back to earth with my final question before we wrap things up. I feel like the last question I've got for you is, and I'm sure we've both been in this situation many times where we've noticed that our opponent is not having a good time. The dice rolls are not in their favor. Something they were trying to set up just didn't work, and it's just kind of ruined their strategy, or a big combat has made them lose a big amount of the force. How do you handle, or what do you do if you notice that your opponent is not having a good time?
You know what? I would say that it's not your job to drag them kicking and screaming into positivity. And sometimes it's okay to wallow in self-pity. We're allowed to be down. Your opponent is allowed to be down. All I would say that if your opponent's not having a good time, I often try to see if I can perk them up a little bit. See what I can do to try and bring them back up. But if it's clear to me that that's where they are at the moment, I think that if you try harder to make them happy, their people are smart. We are very complex creatures. Then they're going to know that you're trying to do it. And all it does is then make them feel guilty for how they're feeling. We are allowed to be disappointed when things go wrong. Like I've had games that I felt like I had in the bag and then things go south very quickly and I'm left at the bottom of turn 5 with a major defeat, just being like, oh, and it's shocking. But the last thing that you need is someone being like, oh, it's okay, buddy. Like, don't worry. This is what could have happened and everything would have been fine. And I don't need a cheer squad telling me everything's okay. Sometimes it's enough. Like I've had people after I had the advert leaving shit kicked out of me who were just like, dude, that was rough. And I just sat there and I was like, yeah. And we had a conversation, and that for me comes in part in giving your opponent room to win. And I think that, yeah, bad things happen. It gets us down. I would say be understanding of your opponent. Empathize with them. Now, that doesn't mean you pander to them and you tell them that you're amazing or you play down or you play less. If you're destroying me, destroy me. Don't pull your punches. I can take it. If I'm playing at a tournament, it's because that's what I want. But you just find a way to be human about it. Empathize, be like, that's rough. I remember one time something charging into dangerous terrain and just completely crippling my opponent's battle plan and effectively handing me the win. And I could see on my opponent's face that it was a devastating outcome, that it had lost them the game and won me the game, and it was on a 1 in 6 chance. And I was like, anything I say now makes it worse. So I just commiserated with my opponent and we moved on and we got through, and by the end of the game we were okay again. But sometimes we let our emotions run, and that's fine. It's part and parcel of playing a competitive game. We're not robots in a room.
And this is where it's also like, you hear people who whinge about the dice rolls, and it's not blaming the dice rolls when they go pear shaped, but also acknowledging when things go really well. And like, oh man, I was really lucky to get that 10-inch charge.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can't also, not whinging and blaming, but letting people you're right. And a strategy that I've found that's worked quite well is if that does happen and time is on my side, I might say, hey, let's go grab a beer. Let's go get a drink. You're going to come to the bar for 5 minutes. And the game might still be going on. But I might just remove them from the situation for 5 or 10 minutes.
Give them a breather,
cool down, get to know them a little bit more, come back, and I found that they're in a better headspace by taking that short break. That's worked for me, but it doesn't always work.
But suddenly, that sometimes when you do that, it's almost that human reminder that you're both people and that's what's happening. For me, a big one that I will celebrate my successful dice rolls that are at my opponent's detriment. Like when my dispossessed make a 10, 11, or 12-inch charge, I will throw my hands up in the air and scream that they are natural sprinters at the top of my lungs.
Yeah.
However, I will also abuse my dice when they fail me hard. But I expect the same from my opponent. When they make a clutch charge that is like guaranteeing them a really powerful turn, I'm not sitting there like crossing my arms being like, yeah, motherfucker. And I think that one thing we kind of all need to get better at is celebrating our opponent's wins and celebrating our wins. There is nothing wrong. Like I remember being in a tournament where 10 Iron Drakes shot Nagash, and I rolled double 6 for the damage on my 2d6 damage Grudge Hammer Torpedo because it shot twice. And so 12 damage from that, and the rest killed Nagash in a single round of shooting. And that for me was kind of the moment where I went like, and I celebrated the shit out of that moment. And it was when my opponent was just like, you could see that that wasn't meant to happen. That was an absolute anomaly. And in any other circumstance, it wouldn't have. But my opponent handled it really well. And we spoke about it afterwards. And they were like, yeah, it was at Moab. It was the same tournament that I played Deke, we were talking about earlier. And my opponent handled it really well and was like, yeah, well, like, it happened. And I realized that if I'd have acted like a dick about it and been really upset, then you had a really crazy, ridiculous moment happen. And that's just what happens. And I was like, yeah, like that's kind of the way, that's why we play the game, and that's the way we play the game. So
I remember playing a girl, Monica, up in Queensland last year, and I was playing Hello Heart, and I cast a spell, and I think I got it off on a 16, or maybe it was an 18. It was it was a 16 or an 18.
As high as you can do, yeah.
It was like bonkers crazy. Hello Heart, I got +6 to the cast. I think I rolled an 11 or a 12. I had +1 from the Hurricane, +1 from the battle mage, being in range of the Hurricane. It was just mental.
Yeah.
Monica rolled an 8. The reason that's important is because she was playing Khorne, and Khorne unbinds spells on a natural 8. And what did I do? I high-fived her. I congratulated her.
Yeah.
And when those things go, you're 100% correct. When things go your opponent's way, you celebrate with them, because it means that the losses and the victories are shared amongst you.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's probably a nice way to almost close out the show, is that we are playing a game. We're playing this for fun. There is literally like no money. You can't be retired, be a Warhammer player. It's about the relationship. It's about walking away from the table and thinking, would I play this person again? And I hope that most of my opponents would say, yes, I would love to play Anthony again. He was a good game. Whether he brought a super hard, competitive, broken, change host, Petrifix Elite, the list is not the person. And I hope that every single person walks away. And that's my intention, is that people enjoy the game, whether I win, lose, or draw, whether it is a decisive victory game, whether it's a cliff biter at the end of the game. We walk away remembering it was a game and we enjoyed ourselves. And the empathy, the relationship, the trust is built over time.
If you'd walk away from the game saying, I'd play that game again, you've done a pretty good job.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things we can do, whether it's the way we start the game, the way we interact with our opponents, the way we end the game, the way that we introduce ourselves, the way we build a relationship, the way we interact on the table. This topic is why we've gone over 2 hours, and we probably could talk like for an hour being a good human. So my advice to you at all is to think about what your goal is. Remember that your goal is to have 5 good games, not to win the tournament. That's a bonus. And if you can walk away with 5 good games, whatever the outcome is at that next tournament, you've achieved your goal.
Yeah. Again, if your goal is to win, there's only one person out of all of the people there who succeeds. If your goal is to play 5 games of War Dollies and enjoy yourself, that is a bar that I believe everybody at a tournament should be able to leap.
Dan, is there any final things you want to share? Any shout outs, anything we haven't covered that is important when it comes to sportsmanship and just being a general good human at the Warhammer table?
Yes, but it's weird. So I didn't really want to put it in context of everything.
Ooh,
but it's something that when you messaged me and asked about it, I was like, fuck it. It doesn't make sense, but I swear it works. And that's, I would say, like, to break your script. And one thing that I've noticed is a lot of people, we have these scripts that we live in. Like, if someone asks you, like, you meet someone and you say, like, how are you going? The response that you give is probably good, or not bad, or pretty good, or not good. You know, like, we're very, like, we just give a canned response. About a year ago, since I've been here, someone asked me one day, and I'd been playing a lot of poker up late the night before. And they were like, how are you? And I was feeling great. So I was like, I'm pocket aces. And then afterwards, I was like, that was a fucking weird response. But for me, it became like a little change to my script. And every day when someone asks me how I am, I genuinely like to think about how I am, how I'm going, and how that would relate to a poker hand. And I think that in your games with War Dollies, if you can crack those little scripts, like when you're talking to your opponent, you'll actually find that you empathize with them more because you'll realize they're a human being and they're not just a series of responses that are already typed down on a keyboard. So what I would challenge is that if you would like in War Dollies to be a better sportsman, and in life to be a more dynamic and fantastic human being, find out what the weird response to "how are you today" is for you, and what that's small. Like it might be, if someone's like "how are you today," it might be a charge roll. It might be double sixes to charge. Or if they're like "how are you today," and you're like, "I am snake eyes on a charge," and then people would be like, "Okay, fuck, he's rough. He's having a rough day." And if you can find those little things, like you change your scripts in games in life, you'll find you're like probably a little bit more interesting to play, and you'll feel more engaged to play against your opponent.
I love it. Whenever I'm having a great day, I'm 10 foot tall and bulletproof because nothing's going to stop me. And it's like, and that was something that I learned from when I did sales. And it was kind of like what the mind harbors, the body manifests. But you've raised a really good final point, and that is that what we've talked about here is not just Warhammer skills, these are life skills. I'm sure when you think about this and put it into context with dealing with your family, your dog, your children, your work colleagues, your neighbors, these are things that you're showing for human empathy, trust, rapport, things that kind of build over time. So I hope you've walked away thinking about ways you interact, and I'm very excited when tournaments really resume. We're all going to be super happy. We're going to be so excited. We're going to hug each other when we can. We're going to shake hands. We're going to, we're going to hang out. We're going to be really cool with each other. And I think it's. I've had a lot of reflection time now that haven't been able to play at the tabletop, and remembering what's important. And it's not the tournament victories. It's not the prizes. It's the people. It's the games. It's the stories. And I can't wait to start having them again with people.
And that would be it. Tabletop Simulator is a wonderful tool, but if it has taught me anything, it's that I miss the people.
Dan, if the people wanted to find you, they want to chat to you more, they want to share stories about grumblings and grudges and all things that are beard related, where can they find you?
So what they need to do is they need to take a small goat and attach it to a large firework. Then what they need to do is go into their nearest forest clearing and shoot it into the air. Now, the firework needs to be green and gold specifically, with a loud initial bang and then kind of a scattering of sparklers afterwards. Now, after they've set that on, they need to turn around backwards 3 times and do a backflip, which they don't complete and land face first on the ground. And then when they roll over to face the sky, they need to say, "Curse you, Scorpio," and then I will appear. That is the best way to get in contact with me. But failing that, Twitter at Dan Unsupervised, or on the Honest Wargamer on Mondays and Thursdays for lists about ridiculous shit in Age of Sigmar, and Soulbound Down, which is our Soulbound stream on Thursday nights.
You do run the best Soulbound show, in my opinion. So do go check that out. Soulbound and Down. I love that stuff.
It has a very attractive cast of characters.
I mean, you've got Tristan, who's a bit questionable at best with his looks, but at least he's good at basketball.
He's great at basketball. He is a ginger, which is why we're very cautious about him and we keep him at arm's length. It does have the most attractive GM of any like RPG show on Twitch, realistically. But yeah, and yes, I am a Vancouverite at the moment. I've been unable to return to Australia due to the Coco Vovo. But that's fine. We'll get back, and I'll go into America, and I'll do all. I can't wait to go through all of my tournaments in America. I'm so excited. I have so many things to learn about America, like mostly their beer, just a lot of their beer, so much beer. Very excited.
Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Chat, thank you for hanging out and sharing a lot of questions. This has been an absolute pleasure. Don't forget, guys, to crush the like button and subscribe and all that good stuff that I meant to say in the YouTubes. I'm even going to try something different. I've even made this special ad roll that I'm going to start playing towards the end. But until next time, guys, happy wargaming. Dan, thank you very much again for being an awesome guest. I learned a lot, and I can't wait to start playing again. And hopefully we can play again soon.
Oh, mate, yes, and in like real life, face to face. That's what I want. I want to taste your tears when I crush your free guild handgunners.
Not going to happen. All right. Thanks, folks. Enjoy the rest of your day. G'day. I hope you enjoyed that video and you're left with some new ideas. One of the biggest ways you can contribute to AOS Coach is by liking the video you just watched and leaving a comment in the comment section. This lets YouTube know this is a good video and it should recommend it to other hobbyists. If you'd also like to support the channel even further like these bloody legends, go check out AOS Coach on Patreon. Otherwise, don't forget your triumph.